Sarah looked out the car window as Mike drove slowly up the narrow dirt road. Tall pine trees lined both sides of the path. The road was so narrow that only one car could fit at a time. Sarah felt excited as they got closer to their new home. "I can't believe this is really ours," Sarah said to her husband. She had been dreaming about this moment for months. Mike smiled and squeezed her hand. "We finally found the perfect place," he said. No more noisy neighbors, no more traffic, just peace and quiet. They had been looking for a mountain cabin for over 2 years. Sarah worked as a teacher, and Mike was an engineer. Both of them lived busy lives in the city. They wanted a place where they could escape on weekends and during vacations. Most of the cabins they looked at were too close to other houses. Some were too expensive. Others needed too much work to fix them up. But this cabin was different. It sat on 5 acres of land in the mountains. The closest neighbor was half a mile away. The dirt road that led to their cabin was called Bear Creek Trail. It started at the main highway and wound through the forest for about a quarter mile. The road belonged to them. It was marked as private property on all the legal papers. Sarah remembered the first time they saw the cabin 3 months ago. The real estate agent had warned them about the road. "It's pretty rough," she had said. "You'll need a truck or SUV to get up there when it rains." But Sarah and Mike didn't mind. The rough road meant that random people wouldn't drive up to their house. They liked the idea of having complete privacy. The cabin came into view as they rounded the last curve. It was a small log house with a green metal roof. A large deck wrapped around the front and side. Behind the house, the forest stretched for miles. Mike parked their SUV next to the cabin. They sat quietly for a moment, taking in the view. Birds sang in the trees. A gentle breeze made the pine branches sway back and forth. "Listen to that," Sarah whispered. No car horns, no sirens, no construction noise. They had bought the cabin from an elderly man named Frank. He had built it himself 40 years ago. Frank told them he was selling because he was too old to maintain the property anymore. "This place has been my sanctuary," Frank had said during the closing. "I hope it brings you the same peace it brought me." Sarah and Mike had spent the last month preparing the cabin for their move. They painted the inside walls. They bought new furniture. They installed a security system with cameras around the property. The security cameras were Mike's idea. The cabin was isolated and they wouldn't be living there full-time at first. Mike wanted to make sure they could check on the property when they were back in the city. As they unloaded their car, Sarah noticed how quiet everything was. The only sounds were natural ones: wind in the trees, birds calling to each other, and the distant sound of a creek running somewhere in the forest. Mike carried boxes while Sarah explored the area around the cabin. She found a small garden area where Frank had grown vegetables. There was also a fire pit made from stones, perfect for evening campfires. "Look at this," Sarah called to Mike. She was standing at the edge of their property line. Through the trees, she could see mountains stretching into the distance. "We can see for miles from here." The cabin had everything they needed. There was a kitchen with all new appliances. The living room had a stone fireplace. 2 bedrooms gave them space for guests. Best of all, the whole house felt cozy and welcoming. They had done their research before buying the property. The cabin was part of a mountain community called Pine Ridge. The community had about 50 homes spread across several square miles. Most of the houses were vacation cabins like theirs. Pine Ridge had a homeowners association, or HOA. Sarah and Mike had read all the rules carefully. The HOA seemed reasonable. They had basic rules about keeping properties clean and safe. The monthly fees were low. The HOA mainly took care of snow removal on the main roads during winter. The HOA rules said that homeowners could paint their cabins any earth tone color. Sarah and Mike liked the natural log color of their cabin and didn't plan to paint it. The rules also said that people could have gardens, fire pits, and outdoor furniture. Everything they wanted to do was allowed. During the buying process, they had met with the HOA president, a friendly woman named Linda. She had welcomed them to the community and explained how things worked. "We're a pretty relaxed group," Linda had said. "Most people come here to get away from city stress. We try to keep the rules simple and fair." Sarah felt grateful that they had found such a peaceful community. She had heard horror stories about strict HOAs that made life difficult for homeowners. Pine Ridge seemed different. As the sun began to set, Mike started a fire in the fireplace. Sarah made hot chocolate in their new kitchen. They sat on the couch together, watching the flames dance in the fireplace. I think we made the right choice, Mike said, putting his arm around Sarah. Definitely, Sarah agreed. I can already feel my stress melting away. They talked about their plans for the cabin. Sarah wanted to start a vegetable garden in the spring. Mike wanted to build a workshop where he could work on wood projects. They both looked forward to hosting friends and family for weekend getaways. The next morning, Sarah woke up to sunlight streaming through the bedroom windows. She could hear Mike making coffee in the kitchen. Outside, she could see deer grazing in a meadow near their cabin. She got dressed and joined Mike on the deck. The morning air was crisp and clean. The view was even more beautiful in the daylight. I could get used to this, Sarah said, sipping her coffee. Mike pointed to their dirt road winding through the trees. I'm glad that's our private road, he said. We won't have to worry about random people driving up here. They had put up signs at the bottom of Bear Creek Trail. The signs clearly said private property and no trespassing. Frank had told them that in 40 years, he had never had problems with people using his road without permission. People around here respect private property, Frank had explained. The community looks out for each other. Sarah and Mike spent their first week at the cabin settling in and exploring their property. They marked the boundaries of their land. They cleaned up fallen branches from winter storms. They set up their security cameras to cover all the approaches to their cabin. Everything seemed perfect. They had found their dream retreat in the mountains. The community was welcoming. Their property was private and secure. Sarah and Mike felt like they had finally found their piece of paradise. They had no idea that their peaceful life was about to be turned upside down by someone who believed he had the right to go anywhere he wanted, whenever he wanted. Their private road was about to become the center of a battle that would test their patience, their creativity, and their determination to protect what was theirs. Sarah was washing dishes when she noticed something strange outside the kitchen window. There were fresh tire tracks in the dirt near their cabin. The tracks were wide like they came from a big truck or SUV. She called Mike over to look. Did you drive anywhere this morning? She asked. Mike shook his head. I've been working in the workshop all morning. Those aren't from our car. They walked outside to get a better look. The tire tracks started at the end of their driveway and made a circle near their front door. Someone had driven all the way up to their cabin and then turned around. Maybe it was a delivery truck, Sarah suggested, but she knew they weren't expecting any packages. Mike looked worried. Whoever it was came right up to our house. They ignored all our private property signs. They had been living at the cabin for 3 months now. This was the first time they had seen evidence that someone else had been on their property. Sarah remembered that they had security cameras. Let's check the footage, she said. They went inside and pulled up the camera recordings on Mike's laptop. The cameras stored everything for 2 weeks before the old footage was deleted. It took them a while to find what they were looking for. Finally, Mike spotted something on Tuesday's footage. There, he said, pointing at the screen. Sarah watched as a large black SUV drove slowly up their private road. The timestamp showed 2:30 in the afternoon. That was when both Sarah and Mike were at work in the city. The SUV stopped right in front of their cabin. A man got out of the driver's seat. He was wearing a dark suit and tie, which seemed odd for someone visiting a mountain cabin. Who wears a suit in the mountains? Sarah asked. The man walked around their property for about 10 minutes. He took pictures of their cabin with a small camera. He also took pictures of their garden area and the fire pit. What is he doing? Mike said, frustrated. They watched as the man walked up to their front door and tried to look through the windows. He even walked around to the back of the cabin and peered through the bedroom windows. This is creepy, Sarah said. He's acting like he owns the place. After taking more pictures, the man got back in his SUV and drove away. The whole visit lasted about 15 minutes. Mike was angry. This guy just walked around our property like he had every right to be here. He was looking in our windows. Sarah felt violated. Their cabin was supposed to be their private retreat. The idea that a stranger had been walking around their home while they were gone made her feel sick. We need to figure out who this is, Sarah said. They decided to check the other camera recordings. Maybe this wasn't the first time the man had visited. Sure enough, they found more footage. The same black SUV had been to their property 4 times in the past 2 weeks. Each time, the man got out and walked around taking pictures. He's been coming here regularly, Mike realized. This isn't just a random visit. Sarah noticed something else in the footage. The man seemed to know exactly where he was going. He didn't act lost or confused. He drove straight up their road like he had been there before. "Look at how comfortable he is," Sarah said. "He's not worried about getting caught. He acts like he has permission to be here." Mike paused the video when the man was clearly visible. "I don't recognize him, do you?" Sarah studied the man's face. He looked to be in his 50s with gray hair and glasses. She had never seen him before. "Maybe he's lost," Sarah suggested, though she didn't really believe it. "Lost people don't take pictures and look through windows," Mike replied. "This guy is here for a specific reason." They printed out a clear picture of the man from the camera footage. Mike wanted to show it to their neighbors to see if anyone recognized him. The next day, Mike drove to the house closest to them. Their neighbor was an older man named Bill, who had lived in Pine Ridge for 15 years. Mike showed Bill the picture. "Have you seen this guy around?" Mike asked. Bill looked at the photo carefully. "I don't know him personally, but I've seen that black SUV driving around the community. He's been checking out different properties." "Checking out properties?" Mike asked. "Yeah, he drives slowly past houses and sometimes stops to take pictures. I figured he was thinking about buying a place here." Mike explained that the man had been on their private property multiple times without permission. Bill frowned. "That's not right. Even if he's looking to buy, he shouldn't be on private roads without asking first." Mike thanked Bill and drove home. He told Sarah what he had learned. "So he's not just targeting our place," Sarah said. "He's going around to different houses in the community." That evening, they got their answer about who the mysterious visitor was. Sarah was checking their mailbox when she found a certified letter. It was addressed to both her and Mike from the Pine Ridge Homeowners Association. Sarah signed for the letter and brought it inside. Mike could tell from her expression that something was wrong. "What is it?" he asked. Sarah opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was an official letter on HOA letterhead. It was signed by someone named Roger Whitman, HOA inspector. The letter was titled Property Inspection Report and Notice of Violations. Mike read the letter over Sarah's shoulder. His face got red as he read. "Dear property owners," the letter began, "during my recent inspection of your property at 1247 Bear Creek Trail, I observed several violations of Pine Ridge community standards. The letter listed 5 different violations. First, it said their cabin was painted an unapproved color. But their cabin wasn't painted at all. It was natural logwood, which was specifically allowed in the HOA rules. Second, it claimed their garden was improperly located. But Sarah had planted vegetables in the exact spot where the previous owner had his garden for 40 years. Third, it said their fire pit was too close to the structure. The fire pit had been there since the cabin was built and had been inspected by the fire department. Fourth, it claimed they had unauthorized outdoor furniture. They had 2 chairs and a small table on their deck. Fifth, it said their mailbox was improperly positioned. Their mailbox was in the same spot where Frank had kept his mailbox for 4 decades. Each violation came with a fine of $200. The total was $1,000. "This is insane," Mike said. "None of these things are actually violations." The letter went on to say that Roger Whitman had been appointed as the new HOA inspector. It said he had full authority to inspect any property in the Pine Ridge community to ensure compliance with community standards. At the bottom of the letter was the most disturbing part. It said that Roger would continue to conduct regular inspections of their property to monitor their compliance. "He's saying he's going to keep coming back," Sarah said in disbelief. Mike was furious. "He can't just drive up our private road whenever he wants. That's trespassing." Sarah reread the letter carefully. It says here that homeowners are required to provide access for official HOA inspections. "But we never agreed to that," Mike said. "That wasn't in the rules when we bought the place." They pulled out their copy of the original HOA documents. Mike was right. There was nothing in the rules about allowing inspectors to access private property without permission. This guy is making up his own rules, Sarah realized. Mike grabbed his phone. "I'm calling Linda right now." Linda was the HOA president who had welcomed them to the community. Surely she would straighten this out. But when Mike called Linda's number, he got a voicemail saying the number was no longer in service. "That's weird," Mike said. He tried looking up the HOA contact information online. What he found made his heart sink. The Pine Ridge HOA website had been updated. Linda was no longer listed as president. Instead, Roger Whitman was listed as both president and chief inspector. He's taken over the HOA, Mike told Sarah. Sarah sat down heavily in a chair. So he's basically saying he can come to our property whenever he wants, make up violations, and fine us for them. And there's nothing we can do about it because he's in charge of the HOA now, Mike added. They spent the evening researching Roger Whitman online. They found very little information about him. He seemed to have moved to Pine Ridge recently and quickly gotten involved with the HOA. How does someone just take over a homeowners association? Sarah wondered. Mike found part of the answer on a community forum. Several residents had posted complaints about the recent changes in HOA leadership. Apparently, Linda and most of the old board had resigned after Roger started pushing for stricter enforcement of community rules. He forced out the old leadership, Mike realized. Now he's in control. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the man in the suit walking around their property and looking through their windows. The idea that he planned to keep coming back made her feel unsafe in their own home. Mike was just as upset. "We came here to get away from people telling us what to do," he said. "Now we have someone who thinks he can walk around our property whenever he wants." They realized their peaceful mountain retreat was about to become a battleground. Roger Whitman had made it clear that he considered himself the boss of their community. He was using his position to invade their privacy and make their lives miserable. Sarah and Mike had no idea that this was just the beginning. Roger's visits were about to become more frequent and more intrusive. Their quiet life in the mountains was about to be turned upside down by a man who believed he had the right to control everything and everyone around him. Sarah was making breakfast when she heard the sound of a car coming up their private road. She looked out the window and saw the familiar black SUV driving toward their cabin. "Mike," she called urgently. "He's back." Mike rushed to the window. It was 7:30 in the morning on a Saturday. Roger Whitman was making another uninvited visit to their property. This time, Roger didn't just take pictures from outside. He walked right up to their front door and knocked loudly. Mike opened the door, trying to stay calm. "Can I help you?" Roger was holding a clipboard and wearing the same dark suit he always wore. "I'm here for a follow-up inspection," he announced. "I need to verify that you've corrected the violations I cited last week." "We haven't corrected anything because there are no real violations," Mike said firmly. Roger made a note on his clipboard. "Refusing to comply with HOA requirements is itself a violation. That's another $300 fine." Sarah joined Mike at the door. "Mr. Whitman, you can't just drive up our private road without permission. This is our property." Roger smiled in a way that made Sarah's skin crawl. "As HOA inspector, I have the authority to access any property in Pine Ridge for official business. It's all in the updated community guidelines." "What updated guidelines?" Mike asked. "We never received any updated guidelines." "Ignorance of the rules is not an excuse," Roger replied. "I'm updating the community standards to bring Pine Ridge up to proper HOA levels." He walked away from the door and started taking more pictures of their cabin. This time he was focusing on details like the doormat, the porch light, and even their house numbers. "You need to leave our property immediately," Mike said, his voice getting louder. Roger ignored him and walked around to the side of the cabin. He took pictures of their propane tank, their outdoor grill, and their trash cans. Sarah followed him. "What are you doing now?" "Documenting additional violations," Roger said without looking up from his camera. "Your propane tank is not properly screened from view. Your grill is too close to the structure. Your trash cans are not regulation size." "This is ridiculous," Sarah said. "These same things have been here for 40 years. Previous inspectors were clearly not doing their jobs properly," Roger replied. "I'm bringing this community up to standards." Mike had heard enough. "Get off our property right now, or I'm calling the police." Roger finally looked up from his camera. "Go ahead and call them. I'm conducting official HOA business. I have every right to be here." Mike pulled out his phone and dialed 911. He explained to the dispatcher that someone was trespassing on their private property and refusing to leave. While they waited for the police, Roger continued his inspection. He measured the distance between their deck and their fire pit. He counted the number of flower pots Sarah had on the porch. He even examined their mailbox with a tape measure. "Your mailbox post is 2 inches too tall," he announced. "That's a $150 fine." 20 minutes later, a sheriff's deputy arrived. Officer Martinez was a middle-aged man who looked tired. He spoke with Mike and Sarah first, then went to talk to Roger. Sarah could see them talking by Roger's SUV. Roger was showing the officer some papers from his clipboard. After a few minutes, Officer Martinez came back to Mike and Sarah. "I'm sorry, folks," the officer said. "Mr. Whitman has shown me documents that appear to give him authority to inspect HOA properties. Technically, he's not trespassing if he has official business here." Mike couldn't believe what he was hearing. "But this is our private road. He's driving on our property without permission. The HOA rules he showed me say that homeowners must allow access for official inspections," Officer Martinez explained. "It might not be fair, but it looks like it's legal." Sarah felt defeated. "So there's nothing you can do?" "You might want to contact a lawyer about your HOA agreement," the officer suggested. "There could be ways to challenge this, but it would have to go through the courts." After the police left, Roger finished his inspection. He handed Mike a new violation notice. This one listed 8 additional violations and $1,650 in fines. "I'll be back next week for another follow-up," Roger announced as he got in his SUV. "I suggest you start taking these violations seriously." That afternoon, Mike called 3 different lawyers who specialized in HOA disputes. The first 2 said they were too busy to take new cases. The third lawyer, James Peterson, agreed to meet with them the following Monday. Sunday was supposed to be a relaxing day, but Sarah and Mike couldn't stop thinking about their situation. They felt like prisoners in their own home. "I can't believe this is happening," Sarah said as they sat on their deck. "We bought this place to get away from stress, and now we have more stress than ever." Mike was researching HOA laws on his laptop. "Look at this," he said, showing Sarah an article. "There are entire websites dedicated to HOA horror stories. We're not the only ones dealing with this kind of thing." Sarah read some of the stories. There were people who had been fined for having the wrong color flowers. Others had been cited for parking their car in their own driveway the wrong way. Some people had been forced to sell their homes because they couldn't afford the constant fines. "This is like a nightmare," Sarah said. Monday morning, they drove to town to meet with lawyer James Peterson. His office was small but neat. Peterson was a friendly man in his 60s who had been practicing law for 30 years. Mike and Sarah explained their situation. They showed Peterson all the violation notices and the photos from their security cameras. Peterson reviewed everything carefully. "This is a tricky situation," he said finally. "Roger Whitman appears to have gotten himself elected to the HOA board and then given himself broad inspection powers. Is that legal?" Sarah asked. "Unfortunately, yes," Peterson replied. "HOAs are private organizations. If the other homeowners don't object, one person can essentially take control." Mike leaned forward. "But what about our private road? Can he really just drive up there whenever he wants?" Peterson studied the HOA documents. "It depends on the exact wording of your deed and the HOA agreement. There might be language that allows for necessary access." He explained that fighting the HOA would be expensive and time-consuming. "These cases can drag on for years," Peterson warned. "And even if you win, you'll still have to live in the same community with Mr. Whitman." Sarah felt her heart sink. "So there's nothing we can do?" "I didn't say that," Peterson replied. "There are a few options. You could try to get other homeowners to vote Roger out of his position. You could document his harassment and file complaints with the county. Or you could try to find technical violations in how he's conducting these inspections." Peterson agreed to research their case further. But he warned them that legal fees could easily reach $20,000 or more. That evening, Mike and Sarah sat at their kitchen table feeling overwhelmed. The legal battle would cost them a fortune and might not even work. "Maybe we should just sell the cabin," Sarah said quietly. Mike put his hand on hers. "We shouldn't have to sell our dream home because of one bully." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of a car on their road. Through the window, they could see headlights coming up Bear Creek Trail. It was Roger again. This time he had come at 8 p.m., just as the sun was setting. Mike opened the door before Roger could knock. "What do you want now?" Roger was holding a flashlight and his ever-present clipboard. "Evening inspection," he announced. "I need to check your exterior lighting compliance." "At 8 p.m.? Sarah asked in disbelief. "Lighting violations can only be properly assessed after dark," Roger explained with his fake smile. He walked around their cabin, shining his flashlight on their porch lights and checking the wattage of their bulbs. He made notes about the placement of their outdoor fixtures. "Your front porch light is not adequately shielded," he announced. Light pollution violation. That's $200. Mike clenched his fists. This is harassment. This is quality community management, Roger corrected. Pine Ridge is going to be the premier mountain community in the state when I'm done upgrading our standards. Roger spent another 30 minutes examining their property with his flashlight. He cited them for having garden lights that were too bright and for not having enough lighting near their trash area. As he prepared to leave, Roger had one more surprise. I'll be conducting my next inspection on Wednesday at 6 a.m., he announced. I need to assess your early morning noise levels. Sarah couldn't hide her shock. Community quiet hours end at 6 a.m. sharp, Roger explained. I need to make sure you're not in violation. After Roger left, Mike and Sarah sat in stunned silence. The harassment was escalating. Roger was no longer content with weekly visits during normal hours. Now he was coming at night and planning to show up at dawn. He's trying to make our lives so miserable that we'll move away, Mike realized. Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes. I don't want to give up our cabin, but I can't live like this. I'm afraid to be here alone when you're at work. What if he shows up and tries to come inside? Mike put his arms around his wife. We're not giving up. There has to be a way to stop him. But as they went to bed that night, neither of them could think of any legal way to end Roger's reign of terror. The man had positioned himself perfectly. He controlled the HOA, he had legal authority to inspect their property, and the police couldn't help them. True to his word, Roger showed up at exactly 6 a.m. on Wednesday morning. Sarah woke up to the sound of his SUV coming up their road. She looked at the clock and groaned. Mike was already getting dressed. I can't believe this guy, he muttered. They went outside to find Roger standing in their driveway with a decibel meter, measuring the sound levels around their property. Good morning, Roger said cheerfully. I'm conducting a noise assessment to ensure compliance with community quiet hour standards. What noise? Sarah asked. We were both asleep. Roger pointed his device toward their cabin. Your refrigerator motor is creating 42 decibels of noise. The maximum allowed is 40 decibels during quiet hours. Mike stared at him in disbelief. You're citing us for the sound our refrigerator makes? Noise pollution is a serious quality of life issue, Roger replied, making notes on his clipboard. This violation carries a $250 fine. Roger spent the next hour walking around their property with his noise meter. He measured the sound of their well pump, their heating system, and even the wind chimes Sarah had hung on the deck. Wind chimes are not permitted during quiet hours, Roger announced. That's another $150. Sarah had reached her limit. This is insane. You can't fine people for the sound their appliances make. Roger smiled his cold smile. The updated community guidelines specifically address noise pollution. I'll make sure you receive a copy of the latest revisions. After Roger left, Mike and Sarah sat at their kitchen table feeling defeated. The stack of violation notices was getting thicker every week. We now owe $3,400 in fines, Mike calculated, for things like our refrigerator being too loud and our mailbox being 2 inches too tall. Sarah put her head in her hands. I'm starting to hate this place. Every time I hear a car on our road, my stomach gets sick. Mike called their lawyer, James Peterson, to report the latest harassment. Peterson listened to the details and sighed. I've been researching your case, Peterson said. The problem is that Roger has written these new guidelines very carefully. Technically, most of what he's doing appears to be legal under HOA law. Even the 6 a.m. inspections? Mike asked. If the HOA rules allow for inspections to ensure compliance, then yes, Peterson explained. The timing might be questionable, but proving harassment is difficult. Peterson had more bad news. I spoke with other residents in Pine Ridge. Most of them are afraid to speak out against Roger. He's been targeting anyone who complains about his methods. Mike felt his heart sink. So we can't get him voted out? Not easily, Peterson admitted. Roger has been very strategic. He's focused his harassment on newer residents like you. The longtime residents who might have more influence are mostly being left alone. That afternoon, Mike decided to drive around Pine Ridge to see if other homeowners were dealing with similar problems. He stopped at several houses and spoke with his neighbors. What he learned was disturbing. Roger had been systematically targeting specific residents while leaving others completely alone. An elderly couple named the Johnsons had received over $5,000 in fines for violations like excessive bird feeders and non-regulation, garden gnomes, A young family had been cited for their children's bicycles being improperly stored and their doghouse being aesthetically displeasing. But other residents, particularly those who had been in Pine Ridge for many years, reported no problems at all. "He's never even been to our property," said one longtime resident. "I think he's trying to force out certain people to change the character of the community." Mike realized that Roger was using his HOA position to cherry-pick which residents he wanted to harass. The pattern was clear. He was targeting younger families and new residents while leaving the established homeowners alone. When Mike got home, he shared what he had learned with Sarah. "He's not just picking on us," Mike explained. "He's systematically harassing specific families to try to make them move away." Sarah was horrified. "So this is all intentional? He's trying to force us out?" "It looks that way," Mike confirmed. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Mike opened it to find Roger standing on their porch with a thick folder. "I have your updated community guidelines," Roger announced, holding out the folder. "Please review them carefully. I'll be testing your compliance starting tomorrow." Mike took the folder reluctantly. It was over 50 pages long. "Testing our compliance?" Sarah asked. "I'll be conducting daily inspections for the next 2 weeks," Roger explained. "This will help ensure that you understand and follow all community standards." "Daily inspections?" Mike couldn't hide his shock. "Monday through Friday at various times," Roger confirmed. "Plus weekend spot checks as needed. It's all explained in the guidelines." After Roger left, Mike and Sarah read through the new rules. They were shocked by what they found. The guidelines covered everything from the exact angle lawn furniture could be positioned to the specific types of flowers that were allowed in gardens. There were rules about the color of garden hoses, the height of grass, and even the direction trash can lids could face. "Look at this," Sarah said, pointing to page 23. "We're not allowed to have more than 3 decorative items visible on our deck." Mike found another absurd rule. "We have to get written permission before hanging anything on our outdoor walls, including thermometers and windsocks." The rules were clearly designed to be impossible to follow. There were so many specific requirements that any homeowner could be cited for dozens of violations at any time. This is his strategy, Mike realized. He's created so many rules that he can fine us for anything he wants. The daily inspection started the next morning. Roger arrived at 7:15 a.m. and spent 2 hours examining every inch of their property with a magnifying glass. He cited them for having a garden hose coiled clockwise instead of counterclockwise. He fined them for having 4 lawn chairs when the limit was 3. He even measured the space between their flower pots and found 2 that were an inch too close together. "Your total violations for today are $850, Roger announced as he prepared to leave. Friday's inspection was even worse. Roger brought a measuring tape and checked the height of every plant in Sarah's garden. He found that 3 tomato plants were slightly taller than the maximum allowed height. "Overgrown vegetation violation," he announced. "That's $200 per plant." He also cited them for having bird feeders that attracted non-approved bird species and for having a doormat that was the wrong size. By the end of the first week of daily inspections, Mike and Sarah owed over $6,000 in fines. The stress was affecting both of them. Sarah had trouble sleeping and was losing weight. Mike was constantly angry and couldn't concentrate at work. "We have to do something," Sarah said on Friday night. "This can't continue." Mike had been thinking the same thing. "The legal route isn't working. Peterson says it could take years and cost us more than the cabin is worth." "So what else can we do?" Sarah asked. Mike looked out the window at their private road. "Maybe it's time to stop playing by Roger's rules." Sarah looked at her husband carefully. "What do you mean?" "Roger keeps saying he has the right to drive up our private road whenever he wants," Mike said slowly. "But what if our road became difficult to drive on?" Sarah understood what Mike was suggesting. "You mean make it hard for him to get up here?" "I mean make it impossible," Mike said firmly. "This is our property, our road. Maybe it's time to protect what's ours." That weekend, Mike spent hours researching traffic control devices and property protection methods. He looked up laws about private roads and property rights. What he discovered gave him hope. As long as they clearly marked their property and gave adequate warning, they had the right to control access to their private road. "Look at this." Mike showed Sarah an article about parking enforcement. Businesses use tire deflation devices all the time to prevent unauthorized parking. Sarah read the article carefully. So we could legally install something to stop unauthorized vehicles? As long as we post clear warning signs, Mike confirmed. It's our private property. We have the right to control who drives on it. Mike found a company that sold retractable tire spike systems designed for parking lots and private roads. The spikes would puncture tires of unauthorized vehicles but could be lowered to allow approved visitors. This could actually work, Sarah said. Looking at the product specifications, Mike was already planning the installation. We put up warning signs every 50 feet starting at the main road. Anyone who ignores the signs and drives up here anyway is trespassing. What about emergencies? Sarah asked. The system has a remote control, Mike explained. We can lower the spikes instantly for ambulances, fire trucks, or any legitimate visitors. For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt a spark of hope. Roger won't be able to drive up here anymore. Not unless he wants to buy new tires every time. Mike agreed. They spent Sunday planning their defense of Bear Creek Trail. Mike measured the road and identified the best location for the spike system. Sarah researched the exact wording for warning signs to make sure they were legally protected. We need to be very careful about this, Sarah warned. If we mess up, Roger could probably have us arrested. Mike nodded. We'll do everything by the book. Clear signs, proper warnings, and full legal authority to protect our private property. Monday morning, Roger arrived for his regular inspection. Mike was installing the third warning sign when he heard Roger's SUV coming up the main highway. It was Tuesday morning, and Roger was right on schedule for his daily harassment visit. Sarah was 50 feet further down their private road, pounding another private property tire damage devices in use sign into the ground. They had been working since dawn to get all the warning signs in place. He's coming, Mike called to Sarah. How many more signs do you need to put up? Just 2 more, Sarah replied, working quickly with the post hole digger. They had spent Monday evening installing the tire spike system itself. The device was hidden in a shallow trench across their road, about 200 feet from their cabin. When activated, steel spikes would pop up from the road surface, guaranteed to puncture any tire that drove over them. The system could be controlled by a remote that Mike kept in his pocket. With the push of a button, he could raise or lower the spikes instantly, but the key to making their plan legal was the warning signs. They had researched the exact requirements and purchased professional signs that met all legal standards. The signs clearly warned that tire damage devices were in use on the private road. Roger's SUV turned onto Bear Creek Trail. Mike and Sarah watched as he drove past the first warning sign without slowing down. He's not even reading the signs, Sarah observed. Mike pulled out his phone and started recording. If this was going to work, they needed to document everything. Roger drove past the second sign, then the third. He was now committed to driving up their private road despite multiple clear warnings about tire damage devices. 50 more feet, Mike said, watching Roger's SUV approach the spike zone. Sarah held her breath as Roger's vehicle reached the area where the spikes were hidden. Mike had the remote control ready but had not activated the system yet. Not this time, Mike said. We need to give him one more chance to see the signs and turn around. Roger completed his journey to their cabin, parked in his usual spot, and got out with his clipboard. He seemed completely oblivious to all the warning signs they had posted. Good morning, Roger said in his usual fake cheerful voice. Ready for today's compliance inspection? Mike walked over to Roger, holding one of the extra warning signs. Mr. Whitman, I need to make sure you saw all the signs we posted along the road. Roger glanced at the sign without interest. Your warning signs don't apply to official HOA business, he said dismissively. Actually, they do, Sarah said, joining the conversation. This is private property and you're driving here without permission. Roger laughed. I've explained this before. As HOA inspector, I have authority to access any property in Pine Ridge. Your little signs don't change that. Mike looked directly at Roger. The signs warn about tire damage devices. Are you saying you're willing to risk damage to your vehicle? I'm saying your threats don't intimidate me, Roger replied. Now, let's get started with today's inspection. I need to measure your deck railing heights. Roger spent the next hour and a half finding new violations. He cited them for having a bird bath that was 3 inches too close to their property line. He fined them for having outdoor extension cords that were visible from the road. He even measured the spacing between their deck boards and found 2 gaps that were slightly too wide. Today's total is $1,200, Roger announced as he finished writing citations. I trust you'll address these issues before tomorrow's inspection. As Roger walked back to his SUV, Mike made a decision. Mr. Whitman, he called out. I want to make absolutely sure you understand. We have tire damage devices installed on this private road. If you continue to drive here without permission, your tires will be damaged. Roger stopped and turned around. Are you threatening me? I'm warning you, Mike said calmly, the same way those signs warned you. This is private property, and we have the right to control access to it. Roger's fake smile disappeared. You can't stop me from doing my job. I'll be back tomorrow at 8 a.m., and if you interfere with official HOA business, I'll have you arrested. Roger got in his SUV and drove away, again ignoring all the warning signs. That evening, Mike and Sarah made final preparations for what they knew would be a confrontation. Mike tested the spike system one more time to make sure it worked properly. Sarah called their lawyer to confirm they were legally protected. As long as you have adequate warning signs and you're defending private property, you should be fine, James Peterson assured them. Just make sure you document everything. Mike set up additional security cameras to record the road from multiple angles. He wanted video proof that Roger had been warned multiple times and chose to ignore the warnings. Wednesday morning arrived gray and drizzly. Mike and Sarah were both awake early, drinking coffee and waiting for the sound of Roger's SUV. At exactly 8 a.m., they heard the familiar engine noise coming up the highway. This is it, Mike said, pulling out his phone to record and holding the spike system remote in his other hand. Sarah was also recording with her phone. I'm nervous, she admitted. Don't be, Mike said. We've done everything legally. We've warned him multiple times. He's choosing to trespass on our property. Roger's SUV appeared at the bottom of their road. He drove past the first warning sign without slowing down, just as he had the day before. Sign number 1, Mike said for the recording. He's ignoring the warning. Roger passed the second sign, then the third. He was now deep into their private property, having ignored multiple clear warnings. He's made his choice, Sarah said quietly. Mike waited until Roger's SUV was directly over the spike system. Then he pressed the button on the remote control. They could hear the spikes deploying with a mechanical clicking sound. Roger's SUV immediately lurched as all 4 tires were punctured simultaneously. Roger tried to keep driving, but his vehicle quickly lost speed as the tires deflated. He managed to coast about 20 feet before the SUV ground to a halt in the middle of their road. Mike and Sarah watched from their cabin as Roger got out of his vehicle and walked around to assess the damage. All 4 tires were completely flat. Roger's face was red with anger as he marched toward their cabin. What did you do to my car? He shouted. Mike stepped out onto his porch, still recording. Your vehicle was damaged by the tire protection devices we warned you about repeatedly. You can't do this, Roger yelled. This is destruction of property. Sarah joined Mike on the porch. You drove onto our private property after being warned multiple times about tire damage devices. You chose to ignore the warnings. Roger pulled out his phone and called 911. I need police at 1247 Bear Creek Trail immediately. These people have sabotaged my vehicle. While they waited for the police to arrive, Roger paced around his disabled SUV, taking pictures and making angry phone calls. He called a tow truck and his insurance company. Mike and Sarah remained calm. They had prepared for this moment and knew they were legally in the right. Officer Martinez arrived 30 minutes later, the same deputy who had responded to their earlier trespassing complaint. Roger immediately started complaining. They've deliberately damaged my vehicle. I want them arrested for vandalism. Officer Martinez listened to Roger's version of events, then walked over to speak with Mike and Sarah. Can you explain what happened here? The officer asked. Mike showed Officer Martinez the warning signs they had posted. We installed tire damage devices on our private road to prevent unauthorized access. Mr. Whitman was warned multiple times but chose to drive here anyway. Sarah showed the officer the video recordings they had made. You can see him driving past all the warning signs. Officer Martinez examined the spike system and the warning signs carefully. He also reviewed the video footage on Sarah's phone. This appears to be a legal tire deflation device on private property, the officer concluded. You have adequate warning signs and the video shows Mr. Whitman ignoring them. Roger was furious. He can't prevent me from doing official HOA inspections. Actually, he can, Officer Martinez replied. This is private property. If you don't have the owner's permission to be here, you're trespassing. The warning signs make it clear that unauthorized vehicles will be damaged. The officer turned to Mike and Sarah. You're not in any legal trouble here. You have the right to control access to your private property. Roger's tow truck arrived an hour later. It cost him $300 to have his SUV towed to town, plus another $800 to replace all 4 tires. As the tow truck drove away with Roger's SUV, Mike and Sarah felt a sense of satisfaction they hadn't experienced in months. I can't believe it actually worked, Sarah said. Mike put his arm around his wife. He's been warned. If he comes back, the same thing will happen again. But even as they celebrated their small victory, Mike and Sarah knew this wasn't over. Roger was too stubborn and too controlling to give up easily. He would be back, and next time he would be even angrier. They had won the first battle, but the war for Bear Creek Trail was far from over. Roger Whitman was about to learn that there were consequences for pushing people too far. But he was also about to escalate his harassment to levels that Mike and Sarah couldn't have imagined. The spike system had worked perfectly, but it had also made an enemy who would stop at nothing to get revenge. For 3 blissful days, Mike and Sarah heard nothing from Roger. No angry phone calls, no certified letters, and most importantly, no black SUV driving up Bear Creek Trail. Maybe he finally got the message, Sarah said hopefully as they sat on their deck Thursday evening. Mike wasn't so optimistic. I don't think Roger is the type to give up. He's probably planning something. Mike was right. On Friday afternoon, Sarah was in the garden when she heard footsteps on their private road. She looked up to see Roger walking up Bear Creek Trail on foot. Mike, Sarah called urgently. He's back. Mike came outside to see Roger marching up their road with his clipboard and camera. This time, he had left his vehicle at the main highway and hiked up their quarter-mile private road. Clever, Mike admitted. The spikes won't stop him if he's walking. Roger arrived at their cabin breathing heavily and sweating. The walk up the steep, narrow road had clearly been difficult for him. Good afternoon, Roger said, trying to sound professional despite being out of breath. I'm here for your regularly scheduled inspection. You're still trespassing, Mike pointed out. Walking or driving, you don't have permission to be on our property. Roger pulled out a stack of papers. I have a court order granting me access to this property for official HOA business. Mike took the papers and read them carefully. The documents looked official, but something seemed wrong. This is signed by Judge Wilson, Mike noticed. Judge Wilson retired 6 months ago. Roger's confident expression faltered slightly. The order is still valid. Sarah looked at the papers over Mike's shoulder. The date on this is from 2019, and it's for a completely different address. Roger snatched the papers back. Administrative details. The authority is clear. Mike pulled out his phone and started recording. Mr. Whitman, these documents appear to be fraudulent. You're using fake court orders to justify trespassing on private property. How dare you question my authority? Roger snapped. I am the duly elected president of this HOA. Elected by who? Sarah asked. We never received notice of any election. Roger ignored the question and began his inspection. He took pictures of their cabin from every angle, measured their deck furniture, and examined their flower pots with a magnifying glass. Your garden shows clear signs of unauthorized expansion, Roger announced. That's a $500 violation. Sarah looked at her vegetable garden. I haven't changed anything since last week. The cucumber vines have grown 6 inches closer to the property line, Roger replied. Uncontrolled vegetation growth is a serious violation. Mike had heard enough. You need to leave our property immediately. If you don't, I'm calling the police again. Roger smiled coldly. Go ahead. But I should warn you that I've filed formal complaints against you with the county. Interfering with official HOA business is a serious offense. After Roger left, Mike called Officer Martinez to report the incident. The deputy agreed to come out and review the fake court documents. These are definitely fraudulent, Officer Martinez confirmed after examining the papers. Using fake legal documents to justify trespassing is a crime. Can you arrest him? Sarah asked hopefully. I need to investigate further, the officer replied. But you should document everything. If he continues using fake documents, we can charge him with fraud. That weekend, Mike decided to research Roger's background more thoroughly. If Roger was willing to use fake court orders, what else was he lying about? What Mike discovered shocked him. Roger Whitman had never been legally elected as HOA president. In fact, there was no record of any HOA election in Pine Ridge for over 2 years. Mike found the real story buried in old community meeting minutes. The previous HOA board had all resigned after a dispute about community management. Roger had simply declared himself the new president without any election or legal authority. "He's been running a fake HOA," Mike told Sarah. "None of his authority is legitimate." Sarah was amazed. "So all those fines and violations? Completely bogus," Mike confirmed. "He has no legal authority to cite anyone for anything." Mike immediately called their lawyer with this information. James Peterson was very interested in what Mike had discovered. "This changes everything," Peterson said. "If Roger has no legitimate authority, then he's been conducting a fraud scheme against multiple homeowners." Peterson advised Mike and Sarah to contact other residents who had been harassed by Roger. If they could document a pattern of fraud, they could have Roger arrested and sue him for damages. Mike spent Monday visiting neighbors who had been targeted by Roger's fake inspections. The Johnsons, who had been fined $5,000 for excessive bird feeders, were eager to help. The young family with the improperly stored bicycles wanted to join any legal action against Roger. By Tuesday, Mike had gathered evidence of Roger's fraud from 8 different families. The total amount of fake fines was over $30,000, but Roger wasn't finished with his harassment campaign. Tuesday afternoon, Sarah was alone at the cabin when she heard someone walking around outside. She looked out the window and saw Roger peering through their bedroom window. Sarah grabbed her phone and called Mike. "He's here, and he's looking through our windows." "I'm calling the police right now," Mike said. "Stay inside and keep recording." Roger spent 20 minutes walking around their cabin taking pictures through every window. He even tried to open their back door in their storage shed. When Officer Martinez arrived, Roger was examining their propane tank with a measuring tape. "Mr. Whitman, I need to speak with you," the officer called out. Roger walked over confidently. "Officer Martinez, good to see you again. I'm conducting a safety inspection of this property." "You're trespassing," Officer Martinez replied. "These people have asked you repeatedly to stay off their property." Roger pulled out another stack of papers. "I have a warrant to inspect this property for safety violations." Officer Martinez examined the documents. "Mr. Whitman, this is a building permit application from 2018. It's not a warrant, and it doesn't give you any authority to be here." Roger's confident expression cracked. "There must be some mistake. My office prepared these documents." "Your office?" the officer asked. "What office would that be?" Roger mumbled something about having an office in town, but he couldn't provide an address or contact information. "Mr. Whitman, I'm placing you under arrest for criminal trespassing," Officer Martinez announced. "You've been warned multiple times to stay off this property." As Officer Martinez handcuffed Roger, the HOA inspector's fake authority finally crumbled completely. "This is a mistake," Roger shouted as he was led to the police car. "I have legitimate authority. I'm protecting this community." "You can explain that to the judge," Officer Martinez replied. After Roger was taken away, Mike and Sarah felt a mixture of relief and disbelief. "Is it really over?" Sarah asked. Mike looked at the stack of fake documents Roger had left behind. "I think so. Between the trespassing arrest and the fraud evidence we've gathered, Roger is going to have bigger problems than harassing homeowners." That evening, their lawyer called with good news. "Roger has been charged with criminal trespassing, fraud, and harassment," Peterson reported. "The district attorney is very interested in prosecuting this case," Peterson explained that Roger would likely face jail time and would definitely be ordered to pay restitution to all the homeowners he had defrauded. "What about all the fines he issued?" Sarah asked. "Completely invalid," Peterson confirmed. "Since Roger had no legitimate authority, none of his citations or fines are legally binding." Mike and Sarah spent that evening calling their neighbors to share the good news. The Johnsons cried with relief when they learned they didn't owe $5,000 in fake fines. The young family was overjoyed to hear their children could keep their bicycles in the front yard. But the best news came the next day. Officer Martinez called to tell them that Roger had been denied bail and would remain in jail pending trial. The judge considered him a flight risk, the officer explained. Plus, the fraud charges are serious felonies. For the first time in months, Mike and Sarah could enjoy their mountain cabin without fear of harassment. They removed the tire spike system from their road, though they kept the warning signs as a reminder of their victory. "I can't believe we actually won," Sarah said as they sat by their fire pit that evening. Mike put his arm around his wife. "Roger made one big mistake. He thought he could bully us into giving up our home." "What mistake was that?" Sarah asked. Mike smiled as he looked at their peaceful property. He underestimated how far people will go to protect what they love. The battle for Bear Creek Trail was over, but the story wasn't quite finished. Roger's trial would reveal the full extent of his fraud scheme, and Mike and Sarah would play a key role in making sure he faced justice for all the families he had terrorized. Roger Whitman had learned a hard lesson about the difference between real authority and fake power, and Mike and Sarah had discovered that sometimes the only way to stop a bully is to fight back with everything you have. 2 weeks after Roger's arrest, Mike and Sarah were enjoying a quiet Saturday morning when they heard a vehicle coming up Bear Creek Trail. For a moment, Sarah's heart jumped with the old familiar fear. "It's okay," Mike said, looking out the window. "It's just the mail carrier." The mail carrier had a certified letter for them. It was from the district attorney's office asking them to testify in Roger's criminal trial. "They want us to be witnesses," Sarah said, reading the letter. "The trial is scheduled for next month." Mike felt a sense of satisfaction. "Good. I want to make sure Roger pays for what he did to us and all the other families." Over the next few weeks, Mike and Sarah worked closely with the prosecutor to prepare for the trial. They gathered all their documentation, the fake violation notices, the fraudulent court orders, the security camera footage, and photos of Roger trespassing on their property. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named District Attorney Lisa Chen, was very interested in their case. "Roger Whitman's fraud scheme affected at least 12 families that we know of," D.A. Chen explained during a meeting in her office. "He collected over $35,000 in fake fines and caused significant emotional distress to multiple victims." Mike learned that Roger's criminal behavior had been even worse than they realized. He was also selling fake HOA compliance certificates to people trying to sell their homes, D.A. Chen revealed. He charged $500 for worthless documents that had no legal value. Sarah was shocked. "How long was he doing this?" "At least 18 months, the prosecutor replied. "Maybe longer. We're still investigating." The trial began on a Tuesday morning in early October. Mike and Sarah arrived at the courthouse early, nervous but determined to see justice done. Roger sat at the defendant's table looking very different from the confident man who used to terrorize their property. He was wearing an orange jail jumpsuit and appeared to have lost weight during his time in custody. The prosecutor called Mike as the first witness. He walked to the witness stand feeling nervous but ready to tell their story. "Mr. Thompson, please tell the court about your first encounter with the defendant," D.A. Chen requested. Mike described how Roger had trespassed on their property, taken photos through their windows, and issued fake violation notices. He explained how Roger had used fraudulent documents to justify his harassment. "Did Mr. Whitman ever show you legitimate legal authority for his actions?" the prosecutor asked. "No," Mike replied firmly. "Every document he showed us was either fake, expired, or for a different property entirely." Roger's defense attorney tried to argue that his client genuinely believed he had authority to conduct HOA inspections. But when Sarah took the witness stand, she destroyed that argument. "Mr. Whitman threatened to have us arrested if we didn't pay his fake fines," Sarah testified. "He knew exactly what he was doing. He was using fear and intimidation to steal money from families." The most powerful testimony came from the Johnsons, the elderly couple who had been fined $5,000 for their bird feeders. Mrs. Johnson, a frail woman in her 70s, spoke through tears as she described how Roger's harassment had affected her health. "I stopped sleeping," she said. "I was afraid to go outside my own home because I never knew when he would show up with more fines. My doctor had to put me on anxiety medication." Mr. Johnson testified that they had almost been forced to sell their home to pay Roger's fake fines. "We lived in that house for 20 years, he said. "Roger nearly took away everything we had worked for." The prosecutor also called several expert witnesses who explained HOA law and proper procedures for community management. All of them confirmed that Roger had no legitimate authority to do anything he had done. A legitimate HOA president Must be elected by the homeowners, explained one expert. Mr. Whitman simply declared himself president without any election or legal process. Roger's defense attorney struggled to present any credible case. Roger had left a clear paper trail of fraud, including fake documents stored on his computer and records of the money he had collected from victims. On the third day of the trial, the prosecutor played the security camera footage of Roger trespassing on Mike and Sarah's property. The courtroom watched as Roger ignored warning signs, used fake documents, and peered through windows. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," D.A. Chen said in her closing argument, "this is not a case about HOA disputes or community management. This is a case about a con man who targeted families in their own homes." She pointed at Roger. "The defendant created a fake position of authority and used it to steal money from hardworking people. He invaded their privacy, threatened their families, and caused serious emotional harm." The prosecutor reviewed all the evidence: the fake documents, the fraudulent fines, the trespassing, and the harassment. "Roger Whitman is not a community leader," D.A. Chen concluded. "He is a criminal who deserves to be held accountable for his actions." Roger's defense attorney made a weak argument that his client was simply trying to improve the community. But the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood to read the verdict. "We find the defendant, Roger Whitman, guilty on all charges." Roger's face went white as the judge read through the guilty verdicts: fraud in the first degree, criminal trespassing, harassment, and theft by deception. 2 weeks later, Roger appeared for sentencing. Mike and Sarah were in the courtroom to hear the judge's decision. "Mr. Whitman," Judge Patterson said sternly, "your actions represent a serious abuse of trust and authority. You targeted vulnerable families in their own homes and caused significant financial and emotional harm." The judge sentenced Roger to 3 years in state prison and ordered him to pay full restitution to all his victims. "You will also be prohibited from serving in any HOA or community management role for the rest of your life," Judge Patterson added. As Roger was led away in handcuffs, Mike and Sarah felt a sense of closure they had been waiting for. Outside the courthouse, other victims of Roger's scheme gathered to celebrate the verdict. The Johnsons thanked Mike and Sarah for having the courage to fight back. "If you hadn't stood up to him, he might still be out there harassing families," Mr. Johnson said. D.A. Chen spoke to the group about the importance of reporting fraud and harassment. "Roger Whitman got away with his scheme for so long because people were afraid to speak up," she explained. "When you work together and document everything, criminals like Roger can be stopped." A few days after the sentencing, Mike and Sarah received a check for $8,400 from the court. It was full restitution for all the fake fines Roger had issued them, plus compensation for their legal expenses. "I can't believe it's really over," Sarah said as they deposited the check. Mike looked at their mountain cabin in the distance. "Roger thought he could force us out of our home. Instead, he ended up in prison." The Pine Ridge community began the process of establishing a legitimate HOA with proper elections and transparent procedures. Mike was asked to serve on the new board, but he politely declined. "We came here to get away from politics and bureaucracy," he told the neighbors who asked. "We just want to enjoy our cabin in peace." That evening, Mike and Sarah sat on their deck watching the sunset over the mountains. For the first time in over a year, they felt completely relaxed in their own home. "I'm proud of us," Sarah said. "We could have given up and moved away, but we stood our ground," Mike agreed. Roger learned that you can't intimidate people forever. Eventually, bullies have to face consequences for their actions. They had won more than just their case against Roger. They had proven that ordinary people could fight back against fraud and harassment when they worked together and refused to be intimidated. The battle for Bear Creek Trail was over, and justice had been served. But the most important victory was that Mike and Sarah could finally enjoy the peaceful mountain retreat they had always dreamed of. 6 months after Roger's sentencing, Mike and Sarah were hosting their first big party at the cabin. The deck was filled with friends, family, and neighbors who had all been affected by Roger's reign of terror. The Johnsons were there, looking healthier and happier than they had in years. Mrs. Johnson had brought homemade cookies and was laughing with Sarah about their shared victory over the fake HOA. "Inspector, I never thought I'd see that man go to prison," Mrs. Johnson said. but you two made it happen by refusing to give up. The young family with the bicycles had brought their children, who were now free to play in their front yard without fear of citations. Other neighbors shared stories of how their lives had improved since Roger's arrest. "It's amazing how much stress one person can cause," said Bill, their closest neighbor. "The whole community feels different now." Mike was grilling burgers when his phone rang. It was James Peterson, their lawyer, calling with an update. "I have some interesting news about Roger," Peterson said. "He tried to appeal his conviction, but the appeal was denied. He's going to serve his full 3-year sentence." Mike shared the news with the party guests, who all cheered. Roger's failed appeal meant he would remain in prison until 2028, ensuring he couldn't harass anyone else for a long time. "There's more," Peterson continued. "The State Attorney General's office has launched an investigation into HOA fraud statewide. Roger's case has become a model for prosecuting fake community officials." Sarah was excited to hear this news. "So other families dealing with similar problems might get help?" "Exactly," Peterson confirmed. "Your case has helped change how these crimes are prosecuted across the state." As the evening continued, Mike found himself thinking about how much their lives had changed. A year ago, they had been afraid to leave their cabin unattended, worried that Roger would show up and harass them. Now they felt completely safe and secure in their mountain home. Sarah joined Mike at the deck railing, looking out over their property. "Remember when we first bought this place," she said. "We thought our biggest worry would be bears getting into the garbage." Mike laughed. "We never imagined we'd have to deal with a fraud artist pretending to be an HOA inspector." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the front door. Sarah went to answer it and found Officer Martinez standing on their porch. "Officer Martinez," Sarah said with surprise. "What brings you up here?" The deputy smiled. "Actually, I'm off duty. I heard about your party and wanted to stop by to congratulate you both." Mike joined them at the door. "Congratulate us for what?" "For standing up to Roger Whitman," Officer Martinez explained. "In 20 years of police work, I've seen too many cases where bullies get away with harassment because people are afraid to fight back. You two didn't give up, and that made all the difference." The officer accepted their invitation to join the party and spent an hour talking with the neighbors about crime prevention and property rights. "The key thing to remember," Officer Martinez told the group, "is that you have rights as property owners. Don't let anyone intimidate you into thinking otherwise." As the sun began to set, the party guests started to head home. The Johnsons were among the last to leave. "Thank you for everything," Mr. Johnson said, shaking Mike's hand. "You gave us our peace of mind back." Mrs. Johnson hugged Sarah. "I sleep through the night now," she said with tears in her eyes. "I haven't had to take anxiety medication since Roger was arrested." After everyone left, Mike and Sarah cleaned up and sat by their fire pit. The mountains were quiet except for the natural sounds they had fallen in love with when they first bought the cabin. "I got a call from a reporter yesterday," Sarah mentioned. "She wants to write a story about our case for a national magazine." Mike looked interested. "What kind of story?" "About HOA fraud and how homeowners can protect themselves," Sarah explained. She said our case could help other people who are dealing with similar problems. Mike thought about it. "I think we should do it. If our story can help other families, it's worth sharing." The magazine article was published 3 months later. It told the complete story of Roger's fraud scheme and how Mike and Sarah had fought back using legal methods and careful documentation. The article generated dozens of responses from readers across the country who were dealing with similar HOA problems. Many of them had been inspired to take action against fraudulent community officials. "Look at this email," Sarah said one morning, reading responses to the article. "A family in Colorado used our methods to expose a fake HOA president who was stealing money from their neighborhood." Mike read over her shoulder. "And this one from Texas says they documented harassment and got their fake inspector arrested." The article had an unexpected side effect. Mike and Sarah started receiving requests to speak at community meetings and homeowner conferences about HOA fraud prevention. "We're becoming experts on something we never wanted to know about," Mike joked after they agreed to speak at a conference in Denver. Their first speaking engagement was nerve-wracking, but they quickly discovered that their story resonated with audiences. Many people had experienced HOA harassment but hadn't known how to fight back. "The most important thing," Sarah would tell audiences, "is to document everything. Take pictures, keep records, and never assume that someone has a legitimate authority just because they claim to. Mike would add, don't be afraid to ask for proof of authority. Real officials won't mind showing you proper credentials. A year after Roger's conviction, Mike and Sarah had spoken at over 20 events and helped dozens of families deal with HOA fraud and harassment. They also stayed in touch with the Pine Ridge community, which had successfully established a legitimate HOA with elected leadership and transparent procedures. It's amazing how well the community functions when people actually follow proper procedures, Bill told them during a neighborhood barbecue. The new HOA had basic rules about property maintenance and snow removal, but nothing like the bizarre and impossible standards Roger had created. Most importantly, all inspections were conducted by licensed professionals with proper credentials. Roger's prison sentence was going as expected. Peterson informed them that Roger had tried to organize other inmates into filing fraudulent legal appeals, but his efforts had been quickly shut down by prison officials. Some people never learn, Peterson commented. Roger is still trying to control and manipulate people even in prison. Mike and Sarah had heard that Roger would be eligible for parole after serving 2 years of his sentence, but they weren't worried. The conditions of his parole would prohibit him from any involvement with homeowner associations or community management. On the second anniversary of Roger's first trespassing incident, Mike and Sarah held a small celebration at their cabin. They invited the families who had been victimized by Roger's scheme. 2 years ago, we thought we might have to sell our dream home, Sarah told the gathered friends. Roger nearly succeeded in driving us away from the place we love. Mike raised his glass. But we learned that bullies only win when good people give up. When we stood together and fought back, Roger's fake authority crumbled. The Johnsons had brought a special gift, a framed copy of the newspaper article announcing Roger's conviction. We want you to have this, Mrs. Johnson said, so you never forget that you helped bring a criminal to justice. That evening, after their guests had gone home, Mike and Sarah took a walk down Bear Creek Trail. The road that had once been a source of stress and conflict was now just a peaceful path through the forest. I'm glad we kept the warning signs, Sarah said, pointing to the private property signs they had installed during their battle with Roger. They remind me that we learned to stand up for ourselves, Mike agreed. As they reached the spot where Roger's SUV had been disabled by the tire spikes, Sarah laughed. I still can't believe we actually did that. It was the turning point, Mike reflected. Roger thought he could intimidate us forever, but that day he learned we weren't going to be victims anymore. They walked back to their cabin as the stars came out. The security cameras were still in place, but now they only recorded wildlife and the occasional delivery truck. Do you ever regret buying this place? Sarah asked as they sat on their deck. Mike looked around at their peaceful mountain retreat. Never. This is exactly what we dreamed of when we started looking for a cabin. Even after everything we went through with Roger? Especially after everything we went through, Mike said firmly. We proved that this is really our home. No one can take that away from us. Sarah smiled and took her husband's hand. Roger Whitman thought he could control our lives and force us to leave. Instead, he ended up in prison, and we're stronger than ever. The battle for Bear Creek Trail had ended with complete victory for Mike and Sarah. They had protected their home, helped their neighbors, and sent a clear message that fraud and harassment would not be tolerated. Most importantly, they had discovered that ordinary people could fight back against bullies and win when they refused to give up and work together. Their mountain cabin had become more than just a retreat. It was a symbol of their determination to stand up for what was right. Roger Whitman had learned the hard way that some battles aren't worth fighting, especially when you're on the wrong side of the law.